Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome, everyone, to this session on social work in England the past year. I'm delighted to be chairing this session today on our first day of Social Work Week 2022, and as we approach World Social Work Day tomorrow. And I'm equally delighted to be joined for our discussion by our two chief social workers, Lynn Romeo and Isabel Trowler, and by the president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services, Charlotte Ramstein. Unfortunately, Lord Patel, who is the chair of the Board of Social Work England, also wanted to join us today, but is unable to be here. We're going to hear from each of our speakers in turn before we then spend some time answering some of the questions I'm sure you will have. We are delighted also to have Carrie Lewis of New Possibilities, our illustrator, with us for the session, and we'll have time for her to show us her visual record of the session before we close. In the next hour, we will be reflecting on the key issues of 2021 for the social work profession and the continued impact of COVID-19 both on social workers and the millions of people they support. The session will consider new approaches and practices that have worked well during the pandemic and how, as a sector, we can explore these positive opportunities. There are many other issues and crises that have arisen over the past year, and particularly recently, as we remember the people of Ukraine and other conflict zones around the world and the impact that social work can have on their lives too. The panel will also discuss some of the themes in Social Work England's second major report into the state of the sector, which was published in January. Social Work in England Emerging Themes was co-produced with our National Advisory Forum, an independent group of people with lived and learned experience of social work, and this is a precursor to a State of the Nation report we intend to publish next year. One of the aims of Social Work Week is to provide an opportunity to come together, to reflect, to be challenged in our thinking and practice, to learn and to simply take some time out from the normal routine. So this session feels important, and especially as we start the week. This past year has been a difficult one on many fronts, challenges that no one in our profession thought we would ever have to face. Sometimes it feels like the challenges keep coming, but with those challenges also come opportunities. We've seen people come together and work together in new ways. We've seen innovation and new and different approaches to practice, and as how, once again, social workers adapted and demonstrated their incredible resourcefulness and creativity to maintain effective and ethical practice. It has also brought opportunities to move social work as a profession forward, building more credibility, status and acknowledgement for the incredible job social workers do and the skill and experience they have. I'm looking forward to exploring this further with our panelists over the next hour. So please do think about what you would like to ask us or any comments that you would like us to reflect on. But for now, I'm delighted to hand over to the Chief Social Worker for Adults, Lynn Romeo.
Great, thank you. I'm assuming you can hear me. Excellent. Well, it's lovely to, thanks for the introduction, Sarah, and happy World Social Work Day to everybody, World Social Work Week and World Social Work Month, I think. I know I've got a couple of weeks of a busy schedule. So I was thinking about what to reflect on during this session, and for me it's been a real challenge because I was away really just before COVID impacted. I went away to Australia to care for my mum, and I was really out of action over there looking after her and viewing from afar the impact that the pandemic has had on everybody. And I've since come back in May and then had to adjust dramatically to a very changed world here. So I think throughout history, pandemics have fundamentally changed things, how we live and work, but it's always difficult to predict what will stick, what will happen long term. But we know some things have changed, people's priorities in terms of work and life, the place of technology and virtual working, and how we work and balance that with face-to-face and relationship-based working. But some things do stay the same: the importance of relationships, community, connection, and for me, the importance of good leadership, particularly in social work. Good quality leadership, opportunities for deep reflective supervision and support for practitioners. We know it's a key predictor to staff engagement and satisfaction, and then the improved quality of the work that they're able to undertake. I have been really struck by the strength of team leaders and principal social workers and directors of adults and children's services, and the way in which they have valued, recognized and supported their social workers to enable them to do the best they could do in extremely difficult and challenging circumstances. And actually, crisis resolution and crisis response is at the heart of social work, and I think it's been amazing the way in which social workers and others in the social care sector have stepped up and got on with things and kept the show on the road under extremely stressful circumstances. The use of technology there's been a real step change in that, and it's supported social workers to connect with individuals, families and communities in a way that we hadn't thought possible, being much more flexible, enabling and creative. And although all that technology was available before the pandemic, but it just wasn't embedded in our work. We hadn't really taken that change to put it in place and for it to be used day in and day out in the way that we work with people. We now have an emerging hybrid way of working. Sometimes we're at home, as many of us are today. Sometimes we're in the office. Sometimes we're going out and seeing people in their own homes and their environments. So it's brought positives to our practice, much more flexibility and adaptability, but we must never and we can't underestimate the power of human connection, the use of relationships, the professional use of self as the key way in which we support and manage and improve the lives of people that we're supporting. It is our relationship-based working that is our core stethoscope, if you like, the things that we use as social workers compared to doctors or nurses. So whatever our developing and emerging model of practice becomes, it needs to support, enhance and enable these relationships and connections to flourish. So some of the other key themes for me, particularly I'm reflecting now on adult social work, is that there's a difference between duties and powers. We always have our statutory duties. We know we have to do it. That always gets prioritized. But we have a lot of different powers that enable us to do a lot more creative and enabling things, and particularly to think about prevention and opportunities for upstream engagement with people. The opportunities to stitch together public health, community health, and social care in conversations we have with people. The flexibility and the adaptability and proactive practice and emotional and practical support that people really value when we're involved with them. The strengths that there are within our communities and the way in which communities came together and responded so brilliantly to supporting people. The way we were able to reduce the level of bureaucracy and process that we'd been so taped into before. We've been able to leave that behind and be much more agile. So we need to really think about what do we bring back and what value does it have, and making sure whatever we start to do again is absolutely adding value. I think the technological development is just incredible, and the way that those opportunities for digital learning, virtual team working platforms, new methods of online assessments or social work interviews or engagements with people in their carers, it's been fantastic. So we need to think about how we make the most of that, but balance it, as I said earlier, with that need for face-to-face work and the way in which we work with people. Increased professional autonomy. Social workers have been given, over the last 12 months, much more opportunity to have confidence, to make decisions and to get on with things. And we need to build on that, because we are a professionally regulated profession, and a lot of learning and time has gone into thinking about how and what and why we do things. So being able to make those decisions with people at the front line is really key. Very importantly, the focus on your well-being, social workers' well-being, much higher up, and understanding that it's important to invest in and support the well-being of our staff if we expect and want them to be able to work with the well-being of the people we're serving. I've seen fantastic improvements in the way in which health services and adult social work services and council departments have been working. Partnership working has really taken a leap forward, and we want to keep that momentum. Also in the field of educating and training student social workers, the partnership working through the teaching partnerships, the way in which universities and local employers have thought more creatively about how they support social workers to have social work students to have their opportunities for placements, online learning, and so on. Really great. But it's also highlighted the importance of the practice educator role and the supervisor role. And I think for me, really thinking about how do we really invest in those key roles within our social work system. We've got increased demands now, many more people coming forward with mental health issues, probably longer term physical issues as a result of the COVID impact. So lots to do as we face the new challenges. The principal social worker roles have really become much more prominent, particularly within adult social services. And I think the responsibilities they've taken on, their involvement in dealing with the easements, their strategic involvement in local resilience forums, updating policies and practice. And they're certainly much more embedded and stitched into the Department of Health and Social Care in advising and help shape new policies and procedures and guidance for the future, particularly in the context of our social work reform agenda and our overall adult social care reform agenda. But it's also acknowledging the ethical and compassionate fatigue that people are suffering from, and our issues around social justice, racism and discrimination and oppression, the impact that Black Lives Matters movement and the spotlight on structurally embedded racism and discrimination, and our role as social workers in championing human rights and social justice, particularly in the way it's impacted on older people when they were restricted in terms of their care home settings, often cut off from family and carers, really needing to think deeply now and thinking about how we address what might have been perhaps overly restrictive arrangements for people in those settings. So thinking ahead for the future, lots of challenges in terms of the workforce, making sure we've got the right numbers with the right knowledge and skills and resilience to respond to changing requirements. The impending, well, the existing and even worsening financial struggles that people will have, the COVID context we're still in, but also thinking about post-COVID recovery and how we respond to those challenges. And now, of course, the political and societal impact of war and refugees and how we will have a role to play in settling people coming into our country from those war-torn places, Ukraine, obviously, particularly at the moment. Thinking about the charging reform implementation, the discharge to assess arrangements, the liberty to protection safeguarding arrangements, and then they come into being mental health act reform, integration, and where social work's place within that integration will sit, ensuring we really do influence the way in which a new and emerging model of health and social care practice really delivers for the people that we're here to serve. So I think I'll stop there. I've used up my 10 minutes, but I just want to say I think the theme, co-building a new eco-social world, leaving no one behind, is absolutely key to what we as social workers in this country are asked to do. And I think our authentic leadership in terms of working with our partners in delivering for people, but most importantly, for those people we work with, is absolutely key. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. I mean, those were really helpful reflections on just the sheer complexity and breadth of the challenge that social workers and the social profession have faced over the past year. I'm going to hand over directly now to our Chief Social Worker for Children and Families, Isabel Trowler. Welcome, Isabel.
Hi, Sarah, thanks. And my morning is the kind of the epitome of what people have been dealing with digitally wise. I've got all kinds of connection problems. So if I fade in and out, then I really apologise in advance. But I presume you can hear me, Sarah. Is that right?
Yes, can hear and see you. Thanks,
Great,
Isabel.
excellent. All right, brilliant. Well, and we've obviously just heard from Lynn about and lots of things that Lynn says I echo. I think, you know, without any doubt, I have never been more proud of the social work profession than I have since COVID. I just think, and I've said this in many different forums, but we need to keep on saying it, is that the way that the social work profession has risen to the challenge of COVID has just been absolutely phenomenal. And I think we will have a lot to learn about what we've all just been through. And I just hope that we hold on to some of the real strengths that have materialized from that, despite the really profound challenges. And I think that there are so many different perspectives about how COVID has impacted on us as social workers, and just two groups very recently that I've spoken to about this is one, and Lynn was at this event with me, was at an event for Skills for Care ran for newly qualified social workers, and their perspective is really interesting. So coming into the profession as students, some of them qualifying, some of them trying to complete their ASYE year in just really tricky circumstances. But really interestingly is that when you talk to them about what they were doing and how practice was for them, it's really striking for me about how much direct work they were involved in, and with families and the children within those families, and maybe more so than might normally be the case. And this real opportunity, and Lynn has talked about this principle of practice autonomy, but this real opportunity to be autonomous and having to think on your feet and just kind of get on and do what you think is the right thing to do, in that, particularly in those early months when there was we were all in absolute crisis mode. Very interesting comment, I think, in the Social Work England report that Sarah's talked about this morning, about despite those phenomenal challenges for children and families, many living in really significant poverty and deprivation, was just how much strengths-based practice came to the fore. It was absolutely necessary to be that strength, but keep that strengths-based focus, and to also to be so mindful of the social context within which families are living. And so much effort was made by practitioners on the ground to make sure that families had the things they needed, real basics like enough food, and how were families going to get the food that they needed to feed their children in a way that we don't always see in practice. The other really interesting perspective that I have got from those COVID months, and in fact years, is through the reviews that we are undertaking into the deaths of Star Hobson and Arthur Lavinia Hughes, and I'm part of the review team, and as a consequence of that I'm talking to practitioners and managers and leaders in those authorities. And I have spent hours in the last few weeks talking to them about what COVID was like and how it's impacted, so significantly on teams and the work that you were all doing with children and families. And it really is an in-depth study that we need to hold on to, because I think it's so rich with testimony about how difficult things were. And one practitioner described, how this, and particularly in those early months, this was described as the killer virus. It was a killer virus, and social workers were being asked and wanted to go out and see children and families. And I just think that that's a really profound mark in our history. Very powerful. I think that despite many people's best efforts at local level and nationally, and with ministers trying their best, that social workers are still feeling unrecognised, that they, in comparison to other public sector professionals, feel that the profile of social work is not high enough, that the public don't understand or appreciate the contribution that social workers make, and that there's still this gap with trust and confidence between the social work profession and the public. And so there's there is more to do there, and that obviously Lynn and I have a really key role in that. But I think we've got to start thinking differently about how we achieve that, because social workers desperately want to see that profile and recognition. Workforce, we're in a very interesting period, quite a worrying period. I know that Charlotte's coming on in a minute, and she might talk about this, but one of the things that Charlotte said to me recently is that if we're not careful, we're going to see what she described as the privatization of the workforce. And when you look at the statistics about child and family social workers, that we've actually got 14% more child and family social workers in post than we had in 2017. And it's true that most vacancies are covered by agency staff, but the turnover of staff is up. I mean, it's the highest it's been in 5 years. So this is a really important consequence of COVID. So there's something happening that they're not, social workers are not leaving the profession. So lots of the headlines are about social workers leaving a profession, or even leaving child and family social work, and that's not so true actually. What is happening is that people are moving around more and more, and also that the use of agency workers is up as well by 3%. The vacancy variation across the country is really very varied. So we have about a 25% vacancy rate in London compared to about 9% in the northeast. So, it really is something that we have to be proactive about. And I think that, the care review for children's social care, for those of you that are on the adult side, is really, really pivotal for this. And Charlotte and I, and probably many of you, have been involved in discussing and debating what we should be doing about workforce, how we can support not just social workers, but the broader workforce who are working with children and families. So a big part of the last year for me has also been about the care review, and with an eye to the future. And there's some real tensions, I think, between, if we think about workforce, then what's the responsibility of local areas, what's the responsibility of government, and that sort of wanting government to step in and to try and do certain things, but also social workers very cautious about government moving in on its territory, and local government too. So there's a real balance to be struck there. And I think one of the things that I have, been reminded of, very substantially, is that, and these are this comes from Eleanor Ostrom, who I was also introduced to, not literally, obviously, over the last couple of years. But she says that there are no simple solutions or quick fixes within complex systems. That this makes monolithic policy and centralized structures less desirable than layered and varied systems. And so I think that, one of the conclusions that I've drawn in the last year is that it is a really complex system, and it's messy, and I can't see any way forward that isn't actually quite a complex layering of all those different systems. So we're really deep into the debates about the future of children's social care, wide ranging, the lived experience of the families that we work with, placement sufficiency, the role of institutional care, the massive increase of deprivation of liberty that we've seen amongst young people, which is really worrying. This balance between helping and protecting, balance between investigation, assessment, and support, and really broad debates about the role of family in society and the role of community. So some huge debates. And I suppose I just wanted to end by really, reassuring that the care review, there's a lot of focus on the care review. When that's published in the next few months, for me, that is just the beginning of the debate, because obviously there'll be a government response, there'll be opportunities for consultation, depending on what those recommendations are and how government responds to those. And then there's, an incredibly again, complex period of implementation. So I think that there is everything to play for children's social care, but also for the social work profession. And yeah, everyone should have, at least in part, a line of sight into the care review and its consequences. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Thanks, Isabel. I mean, again, just the volume and breadth of activity across social workers working with children and families is staggering, and the responsiveness that those social workers have shown in the most challenging of circumstances. And I think a really good opportunity to reflect on just that complexity of the systems that social workers operate within, and often operate very comfortably within, and how they hold that balance and that tension between establishing engaging relationships with some of our most vulnerable families, and also their role within safeguarding. So there's lots really to explore and unpick throughout the rest of the session. And just to remind people to think of the questions that you would like to ask our panelists. I see some starting to appear in the chat now, and we will put those to panelists at the end of the session. But for now, thank you again, Isabel, and I'm really pleased to hand over to Charlotte Ramstein, who is the president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services. Charlotte.
Hello, and thank you. It's lovely to be with you. And I am Charlotte Ramstein, and president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services, only for another 2.5 weeks, and then I'll be handing over to our next president. But much of what I'm going to say, you're going to hear themes and reflections very similar to things that Lynn and Isabel have already talked about. And that's because the themes that are important at the moment are themes across all of children's social work. And in my day job, I'm both the Director of Children and Adult Services in Salford. So I know that countless others up and down the country, and indeed across the world, are joining us during this week, celebrating the skilled and selfless work that social workers do to protect and support so many children and families. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm really proud of my social work background, and I still use many of the valuable skills I learned from my time in frontline practice every day in the work that I do now. However, recent national high-profile cases, as Isabel was saying, have caused much debate in the media about the role and value of social work. For me, this has really called to my roots and caused me to reflect on my time in frontline practice and the essential work that social workers do every day. And I think it's really unfortunate that we very rarely hear about the inspiring stories of social workers changing lives for the better, or even just those daily acts of compassion and kindness that can make all the difference. None of us would ever claim to get everything right all of the time. We're a learning system. But every year we do know and should celebrate that social workers make a difference for the better in thousands of lives. And over the last 2 years of the pandemic, social workers alongside their fellow key workers, as we know, continue to protect those children who needed our support the most under the most extraordinary circumstances. Isabel's spoken about that very real fear of death that we experienced when we were going out doing frontline social work at the beginning of this pandemic. When we were all advised to stay at home, social workers were still going out seeing children and families on doorsteps or in gardens, and going into homes undertaking child protection work in full PPE, working with children despite all those challenges. Everyone had to adapt during the pandemic, but those on the front line had to improvise really quickly. And despite social distancing rules and risks to their own health and safety, that's exactly what they did. So I want to say, on behalf of every social worker I know and the countless thousands that I don't, thank you, because you did so much. Every social worker did so much in those toughest of times. And we know that that work is never finished and never will be. And it's this commitment, selflessness and bravery that we should celebrate, as well as the immense skill shown by so many. Let's not lose sight of the often unheard and yet vitally important work that happens and takes place right at the heart of complex family life. Stories abound of those who work with children who go the extra mile because children matter so much. But we don't very often hear about those, as I said. However, I continue to be inspired by the simple acts of kindness and love shown to children whose lives are tough. Greeting them at the school gate, time for games and talk, taking them out for tea. These things go a long way to show a child they matter. And skilled social work practice is constantly developing. Our understanding of strengths-based, relationship-focused work with a real sensitivity to trauma and loss is making a real difference in practice, and never more so after the 2 years that we've been through. And I say again that no one would claim that we get everything right, and the complexity of the work means that we continue to develop and learn. But I believe that I speak for social workers everywhere when I say that I personally, and I know people on this call, want to see that transformative work recognised more and more. And I know that our 2 chief social workers absolutely endorse that and the importance of recognising the value of social work every day. Despite everything that we hear, we have one of the safest child protection systems in the world. And that's because our social workers live with carefully managed risks every day, making difficult decisions with children's best interests at the centre of their thinking. There's much more that can be done and that should be done to publicly remind social workers and other professionals who make up the children's workforce of their value and the impact of their work. We do need to learn when things go wrong, but we need to recognise and value when things go right. One of the difficulties is that social work is a profession that works in the intensely private arena of family life. And it's difficult to portray accurately what a child and family social worker does because the stories of impact are so personal. Relatively few people have contact with social workers, but they work as part of an invaluable, complex multi-agency system with children and families at the centre. And context is key, because no social worker can do their job well alone. We're operating in difficult circumstances, with local authority budgets cut in half after a decade of austerity and more, and rising child poverty having a clear impact on the number of children needing our support. When I was a practicing social worker, my biggest fear was always that a child would come to harm on my watch. And we only have to look at court judgments, Ofsted inspections, laws and regulations, and the judgments of the press and social media to realise that my fear was well-founded. My fear, however, was not how others would judge me, but that I would fail a child. To know that a wrong judgment could impact on the safety or even life of a child is pressure indeed. Thank goodness then for the clear expectation of the need for supervision, support and partnership working to provide reflection and challenge for the difficult decisions. And we must have this for all of our workers. There is so much that government can do to support us here and so much that we can do for ourselves. As Isabel said, we're currently facing a shortage of social workers and that's putting real pressure on our sector. We know that some people are leaving, but actually there is a lot more going on here and we really need to understand what it is that is leading to that rise in the numbers of vacancies and which is at a peak right now. And for us in ADCS, we would certainly support a national social work campaign similar to the government's teacher recruitment efforts to showcase that social work is a rewarding career and that good social work literally changes lives. As has been said, there's a lot on the horizon nationally for children's services. The independent review of children's social care is due to report this year with its final recommendations, and we've certainly been heavily involved in that. Its case for change reiterated a series of very important issues that ADCS has been raising with government over the last few years, and we know we're not alone. The value of early help or family help, as Josh defined it in his case for change. The impact of poverty on children's lives, the importance of relationships and the need for new models of care and ways of working, especially for older children. And we need to learn from what works as well as things that are not. And funding, together with that coordination of child and family policy across the whole of government, not just the Department for Education, is really crucial for the future. And in this time of potential change, there's plenty to reflect on. What is our appetite for living with greater managed risk? Which children would see benefit from that shift? Which ones might suffer? How do we apply the wealth of good practice available as widely as possible? Social workers are living in a grey area of conflicting expectations which are managed every day. And our children matter. The Care Review calls for a vision for children's social care, and that's really important. But we also need a coherent strategic long-term plan for children in all areas of their lives, one that recognises the barriers that they face, particularly for those growing up in poverty and deprivation. We know that practice research, evidence-based innovation and new ways of working are giving us hope that social work will become even more effective and will continue to evolve. Social work is a part of a complex safeguarding system working at different levels of need, and we know there is much still to improve. We will never stand still. The context in which social workers operate is key. So it's vitally important that ministers, government officials and the wider public understand this. In this country, we still have shameful levels of child poverty, and we know that the impacts of COVID have been differential. The relationship between child poverty and the involvement in children's social care is clear. 1 in 3 children are living in poverty today, but the pandemic has simultaneously exposed and heightened the stark disparities between disadvantaged children and their more affluent peers. We know it means cold homes, overcrowding, hunger and stress, huge pressures on family life which risk family breakdown. It can mean charities stepping in to fill the gaps. It can mean schools feeding pupils and their families in a crisis. It's put pressure on mental health, both for children and adults, and we've seen a rise in the complexity of cases referred into children's services. This is not okay. It is simply unacceptable. And as we learn to live with COVID, we must address those long-term impacts that are still emerging. And we must continue to shine a light on inequality. And we've all spoken about the fantastic work that's been done to adapt to new ways of working during the pandemic. Tough though lockdown was, there are plenty of positives we can take forward. We've referenced technology to keep in contact, both with families who've been harder to reach, and we've been able to tailor that to meet the specific needs of some children and families. Likewise, we've held virtual meetings that have allowed more colleagues from partner agencies to join than maybe they would have done previously. And we've connected like this across wider swathes of the workforce and up and down the country to learn and support each other in new ways that simply weren't possible at speed as they are now. And for some, being able to work from home at least part of the time has created a better work-life balance. So there's little doubt that we'll continue to practice some of these newly developed skills in the future and further refine them. But we mustn't lose sight of the value of being together physically with colleagues and with children and families. Being around fellow professionals, having face-to-face conversations, providing support and shared learning is invaluable. And of course, there's no substitute for being present in a family home, seeing the child with their family and developing those all-important relationships in person. As we move into a future of living with COVID and recovering from its impact, adapting our practice to new hybrid ways of working and focusing on the continued development of best practice, in a year when the Children's Social Care Review will make its recommendations for the future, social workers everywhere remain essential and hugely valuable. So I hope for all of you listening in and for all those who will listen later online, I hope that we all are able to enjoy well-deserved celebrations this week, that we're able to pause and reflect on the value of social work for our children and also for our adults, and that through that pause and that reflection, we will emerge stronger as we go forward into this next important year. Thank you so much for everything you do, and I'm going to hand back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. There's so much to take from what you've said, and I think that there's a lot for us all to reflect on from across our three speakers. I think for me, thinking about the fact that good social work changes lives is it's never felt truer than it has in this past year. And I think one of the themes to pick up from each of our three speakers is just that importance of face-to-face contact and really the relationship, being present with families. And it's interesting just reflecting on our opening session, which was all about co-production and celebrating co-production and families as the core agents of their own lives, and how social workers can play such an instrumental role in giving that power back to those with whom they're working, and to do that then on a broad scale that will ultimately change the system within which we're working. So lots to think about. We've got some questions coming through. So I'm just going to have a look and pick out the first question. Not in any particular order, but I think this one is for Lynn, which is just reflecting on adult social workers already being very fatigued from the past couple of years and are now having to contend with complex changes in legislation and the prospect of inspection, and how well you think that social workers within adults are being equipped to cope with some of those changes.
Thank you. Certainly, I think we've got a lot to do to ensure you are equipped to cope with the changes, and there's a lot of work going on within the policy team here who are responsible for the social workforce to ensure that the money we've been allocated in terms of investment for workforce as part of the social work reform agenda will support increasing the numbers of social workers coming into adult social care, increasing the opportunities for apprenticeships, looking at trying to, as I alluded to in my talk, increasing the opportunities for more practice educator capacity and supervisory capacity. And we've got the principal social workers and others heavily involved in helping to shape practice guidance to be ready to respond to the charging reform requirements in terms of assessments, who should be doing them, how we balance what social workers should do in that space to ensure we make the best use of deploying social workers, but also in terms of the Mental Health Act reforms, liberty protection safeguards. There will be a lot of codes. There will be codes of practice guidance, and we will be investing in the CPD requirements that social workers will need to be well placed to respond appropriately, as well as other enhancements to the system to help manage that. With the inspection and assurance framework, again, social workers are contributing to shaping that. There'll obviously be opportunities to think about the timing of all these things so that it is manageable and we don't create a perfect storm of everybody trying to do everything at the same time. But I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that and making sure there's as much support to equip you as well as we can to respond accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And just looking for the next question, there was one from a student social worker. Do you have any advice for students who are going to be entering into the climate that all of our speakers have set out, really? I'm going to ask that to Isabel first.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think I mentioned when I was talking that I was at an event for ASYEs last week, I think it was. And I think that for students, it's been a very, very particular period, and you are coming into an arena which is feeling really fraught at the moment. And but I have to say that throughout my whole career, that social workers do work in incredibly tough circumstances. That the sort of the pressures of for families that we work with and pressures for social workers are always really, really intense. So I suppose some obvious pointers would be for students coming into the field is that to be really clear about the support that you need, really holding on to the value base of social work, and that we are here to make a difference, to find like-minded people in the workplace. I always say, you know, choose where you work really carefully, that the kind of the context and the conditions for, you know, effective and meaningful practice do vary hugely across the country. And, you know, you have to be working in a place where you feel that you can make a difference, and that you're, you know, that you're staying close to the principles of social work. And also, you know, just to remember that those first couple of years, you know, your kind of early career are some of the toughest, and you'll be on a steep learning curve. You know, stay with it. The more you learn, the more confident you'll become. And, you know, it's a never-ending journey in a way. And it's a very exciting one. And yeah, stay with it. It's a fantastic career. So many opportunities for you as a person, but so, you know, much help that you can give. So stick with it. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabel. And we've got questions coming in thick and fast now. So I'm going to move to a different one. And I'm going to ask this back to Charlotte because it's on something that you mentioned, and it's how we can collectively persuade government that there should be a national recruitment campaign that is as high a profile as that for teachers and nurses around social work.
So I think it's a really good question, and certainly from an ADCS point of view, we're already having that discussion with government about the importance of doing that. I think their awareness about the level of vacancies in social work currently is causing them concern, and they recognise that they need to do much more to demonstrate their value of social work and also commit to it. And we've talked a lot about the comparison with similar roles, so the comparison for teachers, for nurses, for first-line police officers, and how those approaches have been championed, and what is it that we can do around social work that would give it that equivalent prominence. And I think there is appetite to do that, and certainly people we've been talking to have said, well, tell us what would work, and obviously that they would then consider that. So I think we're pushing at an open door at the moment, and we just need to frame that amongst us. And obviously from a children's point of view, Isabel will be really critical to that. From an adult's point of view, Lynn will be really critical to that. So we need to make better use of that collective Social Work England, Chief Social Worker, local authority, ADCS kind of championing, and come up with solutions that government could get behind in order to get those priorities in for the future. And I think as well, our regulator, as in Ofsted, are recognising the concern. So there's a role for them too, because clearly when there are significant vacancies in authority, it is much harder to sustain high quality practice. So there is an opportunity for them as well to help highlight the risks of not having a sustainable workforce, but also to contribute to the solutions. So it needs to be a collective approach, I think, but we're on it.
I have no doubt. Thank you, Charlotte. And just linked to that, actually, something to pick up on that Isabel made reference to earlier about the role that we can collectively play in changing some of those negative perceptions that we know exist about social work, and the different roles that we can all play in helping to shift some of that. It's very easy to see the negative headlines, but it's very rare to see those really positive, good news stories about how, as you said earlier, good social work can change lives. So do you just want to say a few words about that, and then I'll ask our other panelists too?
Absolutely. And I think we have to be brave and tell those good stories, and we can't always tell personal stories because we can't identify people, which does make it hard, but obviously that's also right. Now we know during the last 2 years A lot of care leavers particularly, and some families have broken cover and said, no, I want to waive my right to anonymity. I want to talk about the positives that I've experienced. Sadly, a lot of people choose to do that for negative reasons, but I think we have to be better at telling stories, celebrating good practice, and we can do that around practice and impact without identifying individual families. And we need to be able to do that, not in a self-righteous way, and not suggesting that we've got it all right, because we never get it all right, and it's really important. So it's celebrating with humility, and having that awareness of there is so much more always that we can do. And I know a lot said about inconsistency across the country. Well, there will always be inconsistency, and there are some things we can do, you know, to improve that, but we have to live with the fact that it's not always okay everywhere all of the time. But actually, if we look hard enough, there are good stories to tell everywhere, and we just need to be brave and tell them. It's about, for me, it's about telling them in the right way, because when we tell it in the wrong way, it appears to be bragging, and then people go, yes, but, yes, but. So it's trying to do it in a way that's sensitive. But as social workers, that's our skill set. So we should be able to do that.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Charlotte. Lynn, same to you, please.
Yes, I just want to pick up on a few things. Firstly, I think a national recruitment campaign, for want of a better word, I think we have to be careful about what we'd expect of it. I think it can raise the profile of the profession and promote it. Whether it actually impacts on how many people put themselves forward to be social workers, I'm not so sure. We've just had one around social care staff in adult social care. And I think actually what works much more effectively is what you're doing locally, because you're usually recruiting from your local populations or local universities. So the teaching partnerships, the way in which local authorities work with their HEIs, the way in which they work with their sixth formers to support and encourage them to think about a career in social care, which I think will be much more effective. And in terms of the good news stories, the thing I found really works is when people who've had a really good experience of a social worker and it's made a difference to them, when they're the ones telling that story, when they want to write about that or be interviewed in their local newspapers or to be on a national platform to talk about that, that is the thing that can make a real difference. So that co-production, if you like, working very closely with people who have had positive outcomes because of what social workers and social work practice have been able to help them with, that is a really good way to think about how you promote the good work of social work. And I've seen some fantastic examples in the years I've been in this job. It's really changed, I think, but probably we just need to do a bit more of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And finally, and just briefly to you, Isabel.
Well, yeah, it's just interesting is that even the three of us have all got slightly different perspectives on what we should do. So, my understanding is that we don't have a problem recruiting people who want to be social workers. So, the real tension we've got is about retention. But I do think that there's something we have to do more to get social work into the mainstream, and that is hard because, you know, well, particularly on the children's side, it's about how mainstream are we really. But I think that there are, you know, that there are many different things that we should probably try again. We have tried certain things in the past. That one of the big problems is that the media aren't interested in good news stories. So, you know, what people want to hear is when things go wrong. So I think there's something about us positioning ourselves in just more broadly in kind of media media dialogue. So it's not necessarily about social work, but it's about social workers having a public platform and talking about broader social issues, if that makes sense. So I think that all, you know, a national campaign to profile social workers, a one-off won't do it. It's got to be a sort of constant drip impact. But Charlotte's absolutely right that this is certainly in the Department for Education, that we're really concerned about what's happening and about the volatility in the workforce and the impact that has on children and families. So yeah, there's definitely work to do.
Thank you, and thank you so much to our three panelists. We're rapidly running out of time, but before we close, and Kate is going to close us out of the session, I just wanted to give the opportunity to Carrie, who's been our fantastic illustrator in the background, to showcase some of what she's done and her graphic recording of the things that we discussed today. Carrie.
Hey, so yeah, loads of information there, and the continuity of those who were speaking was really nice to hear. There are some real golden threads that are being woven in and out of this theme and what's happened in the past year, shall I say. There's been lots of sort of key issues that I've talked about kind of down this side of the poster. People have been talking about compassion fatigue, and how that's had an impact, not just on social work itself, but everybody who's been involved, because of these sort of world challenges that have had a massive impact on people. But you've rise to the challenge. You continually adapting to what you need to do, continue developing and learning. You're finding new approaches and practices that are really influencing models of care and support. You're exercising the flexibility and the creativity that is available to you. The whole of the last sort of year or so has brought together huge amount of responsibility, and the social work pressure of that responsibility is very much aware. You are very much aware of it amongst you all. The key to dealing with some of this and the emerging sort of themes that are coming out is that enhancing and enabling relationships, that's really, really important. And make decisions with people, not to people. Working together in partnership, so those who are joined to the social work network and other professionals, get them involved as well, and really explore the opportunities that are available to you and value what you do because it's right. There are lots of new methods available, and we need to share that out with people, ensuring that there's new creative approaches, that we're gaining experience, that we're learning from the lessons that have been sort of shown to us over the last year. Massive shift in the use of technology, and we've just got onto this other side here that you can't quite see on the poster, but down here what it says is there are no quick fixes. It's a complex system and needs to be recognised as so. You need to work together, supporting families the best way that works for them, leaving nobody behind, and really being proud of what you do as social workers and raising that profile so that you get the general public on board, and when they're on board, hopefully it will lift everything up and you won't be getting the bad press that you feel like you're getting. How does that feel?
Fantastic, Carrie. Thanks for talking us through the illustration. That's wonderful work. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our speakers on the panel today for their really interesting views and answering the great questions that came in today. Thanks so much also to Sarah, our chair. Just a quick reminder that today's session will be uploaded. It is a recording. It will be on the Social Work England YouTube channel. And if you're a social worker that attended today, then you can use this session that you came along to as a part of your CPD, so you can reflect on that in your online account. Do fill in the evaluation at the end of the chat for us, let us know what you thought, or you can email us on the email address provided there by Catherine. Just on behalf of everybody today, just want to thank you all so much for coming along today. It's been a wonderful session from everybody, and enjoy the rest of Social Work Week. I hope you have great experiences at any other sessions that you're going to today. So that's it from the Social Work England team for today.